Welcome to our weekly blog. Hard to believe, 12 days till Christmas. The paganization of Christmas has always been something I struggle with, but messiology and the way God works in the midst of the mess has helped me stay positive. It's interesting how one of the biggest focuses is exchanging gifts, but in the New Testament, the only gifts were gifts to Jesus. And I hope you're making Jesus and giving to him and his work the top priority for this Christmas. This is your lucky moment if you've served on doulos and you live in the UK. I've just got a few of these puzzles, all 3 or 4 ships, not our latest one. And I'd like to send that to you as a Christmas gift. You have to have served on doulos, so tell me what years, and it has to be within the UK. I might take a few with me in my suitcase to the States, but at this point, limiting it to the UK. What a great puzzle. I just sent one to a dear friend who served on doulos, and boy's already going for it big time. Of course, I'd prefer to send it to people who actually do puzzles. Next week will be my Christmas blog. Between now and then, I will have had cataract surgery. So whether I'm going to have a patch over my eye next week, I don't know. But I appreciate those of you who are praying for me. And what an encouragement, especially to get some emails from former Gophers like Drew Letrick, who is trying to watch every blog. We appreciate even when you click like, and we like it even more when you subscribe. Well, here we are with 10 more amazing men that I've had the privilege of meeting. And one of the reasons I'm doing this series is to try to hit hard this denominationalism in which people of a particular denomination, whether they're the biggest in the world or smaller, tend to think their church is the only church. This, to me, today in modern society, with the facts of history staring us in the face, it's really folly. To believe that your denomination is the best and it fits more your theology, that's totally different than this very narrow-minded, dogmatic position that denominations take. And I find people, and I'm very linked with a number of denominations, often they only know leaders in their own denomination. Some have never heard of these people that we are mentioning in this series who represent different denominations and different international movements and organizations. One of the reasons the UK was the key nation for Operation Mobilization to really take off was God had prepared the way through other interdenominational thinking people. If you think that's the way it is in other nations of the world, obviously you haven't been there. So it is changing. The United States, of course, impacted and certainly very, very much committed to a wide range of organizations. Please keep in mind that from the 28th to the 31st of this month, I'll be there at Urbana, where I've had the privilege of speaking 4 times in the past. I'm just there to meet with people, to fellowship, and we have an OM exhibit. And if you're at Urbana or you know anybody going there, please get them to visit our exhibit. There are so many exhibits. We're not sure how many are ever going to find us. Spent an awful lot of books to give away. I think there's still some late registration opportunities. Just Google Urbana. It's in Indianapolis, and you'll find out. So who are these 10 more amazing people? The first one is Keith Green. He was a musician. We have his biography here somewhere. We couldn't find it, but he's known for his music. I got linked with him about a year or 2 before he died. In fact, we walked down this runway having fellowship, where a year or so later, maybe less, the terrible airplane accident took place and he with others died. It's always been a shock to my system. He was one of the very unique, strong, outspoken musicians, writing some amazing songs which are still being listened to. Again, you can get them on YouTube. And I especially remember because I've never had much difficulty ever telling any kind of lies. But with Keith Green, I told a lie. We were walking through his warehouse. He showed me his new, guess it was a new cassette tape of his music and said, "Oh, have you heard this?" Without thinking, I said, "Yes," justifying it in my head that I had heard much of his music. But in fact, that particular tape I had not heard. And so that was not the truth. And when I was praying with Leonard Ravenhill over at his house for his birthday, Keith came. I was convicted and took him into a separate room and began to cry and confess this sin that I had told him this lie to, I guess, impress him. I hope you still enjoy, as I do, the great music of Keith Green. His widow Melody is still with us. We try to keep some contact. The second person is Jack McAllister. Again, not a name known today, but in the 60s and 70s, Jack was leading the way in raising funds through many different methods, but pioneering television. He was the founder, or maybe he was the second person, of the Every Home Crusade, which became pretty well the largest literature distribution agency in the world. Some of you would know the name of the man who was his successor, or maybe he was one successor later, as Dick Eastman. We had Rich Fellowship in Colorado Springs not long ago. Jack wrote some material, but it's not that available. He and I were very different. I found it very complex at that stage of my life to relate to him. But later on, as he went through a crisis and then he had to step down, he and I became very close and had precious times of fellowship. I am sure there are hundreds of thousands, could be millions, if you know how church growth has been in the past 100 years, because of Jack McAllister and his tremendous teams around the world. And that ministry still exists. I think they call it Every Home for Christ. They may have changed it again. And then the third person, again, would not be known to most of you. And his book, Crime of the Century, was a huge influence in OM in the very early days. Very extreme book, very strong about making global missions the priority. And he had 2 or 3 PhDs. He started a large publishing ministry in Japan. He would start different things and then always leave them to others. I was so grieved that he died relatively young. And one of these days, I'm going to find Crime of the Century and perhaps read it again. I remember being in a fundraising event in the States. Maybe the first time I met him, we became close friends after that. He was the guest speaker. And I remember he said something sort of surprised me. He said, "I believe in the hereafter, and I'm here after an offering." And wow, he raised a lot of money that night. Next year, two of my blogs, I'm going to show from the scriptures the complete unbiblical position of saying we don't raise funds or we look to God alone. This sounds very spiritual. Again, God uses all kinds of things, but it's clear in scripture, especially Philippians and Corinthians, that Paul was a fundraiser and we need to follow his example. And then the fourth person, again, a totally unusual person. You probably haven't heard his name. We generally don't honor business people that much within the church. But I want to honor Bob Van Kampen, who graduated from Wheaton College. I remember when he told me this story, he went to this broker to get a job as a young trainee in the whole world of property and brokerage. And the secretary said, well, he can't see you today. Maybe he can see you later in the week. And Bob, strong-minded, said, please go tell your boss, probably he gave his name, that I only have today available. The head guy was sort of impressed with that, interviewed Bob, gave him the job, which eventually led to Bob being one of the most wealthy Christians in the United States. He upset a lot of people because he went against the trend of last day theology, and people like Tim LaHaye, and came out with the book The Sign. People, and I was just learning or relearning or whatever, but people call it the theory of pre-wrath, to the end of the age. And then he did a novel, one of the few novels I've ever read on that subject. Again, there's a message in this because it's so heartbreaking that churches have split over the theology of the last days, when it's so obvious, if you really study widely, that there's a wide range of teachings about the end times, and they all have verses. Bob was an avid student of the Word of God. My heart broke as he died in his 60s. I had the joy recently of being with his widow, and only heaven will tell the story of what he and they released into kingdom ministry. And then we jump to a completely different person, Helen Roseveare, one of the great missionaries to Africa. She was actually raped. She tells the story herself, and yet engaged in forgiveness and became an outstanding missionary, many coming to Jesus. My time with her was brief, but we exchanged quite a lot of correspondence, and we've always been pushing her books. There's Living Sacrifice, one of the strongest books on discipleship you could ever read. And there's Digging Ditches, the latest chapter of Inspirational Life. You'll surely want to find something out about Helen Roseveare. And then the sixth person, and I'm running out of time, is Austin Sparks. He founded the Christian Fellowship in Forest Hill, got linked with us, and later on, through some very interesting changes, when Austin Sparks died, we ended up owning the property, but of course, giving the church a 999-year lease. That became my international headquarters, where I operated out for many years. I studied his life very carefully. He was very different in his day. Today, there's all kinds of people like that around Britain with different ideas and seem a bit radical. Some say he was the pre-birth of the charismatic movement, but you can't put people in a box. He was influenced by Watchman Nee, but more by Jessie Penn Lewis, and she's the one that took in Evan Roberts when he had his breakdown after the Welsh revival. Tremendous history. I've had the privilege, of course, of studying church history in Britain and visiting many of the places, and in this case, meeting personally the person involved. And then the seventh is Peter Maiden. I've talked about him, of course, a number of times, constantly trying to get people to read his book, Building on the Rock. Building on the Rock, or my favorite book on discipleship, or his book that he was writing before he went to heaven. Radical Gratitude. How we thank the Lord for this brother, who was my associate for 25 years, became the successor, and turned the work over to Lawrence Tong a few years before. To the surprise of all of us, he went to heaven. And then number 8, and I'm going to have to rush, is Ken Taylor, one of the first older godly men I ever met. On my way to Mexico, I stopped in to pick up Gospels at Moody Press. He was in charge of Moody Press. We became linked, later founded Tyndale House, and we were involved as partners from day one. And the Tyndale Foundation especially continues to stand with OM, and especially OM ships. And then number 9 is George Duncan. George Duncan was a great Keswick speaker. I was privileged to have him as a spiritual life speaker at Moody Bible Institute, and it was dynamite. That's just one of his books. and he became a friend and only had him story. And finally, this Friedrich Hansler, the founder of Hansler Publishing House, a leader among the evangelical Lutherans, OM in Germany, that we were able to break into that denomination to some degree and see the growth that we were about to see in Germany. We pay tribute to Friedrich Hansler, who published my books and so many other great books. So he was a leader in the whole field of music. We had many rich times of fellowship together. And what a reunion it will be when we can be together in heaven. God bless you.